Welcome to your challenge video. As promised in this one, it's going to be up to you to use what you've learned about Mongoose so far to improve both the user and task model. There are actually two challenges here. The first one is going to require you to add a new field to user, and the second is going to require you to customize the task model. Let's go ahead and start with the user challenge, since the user code is already uncommented and the task code is currently commented out. So up above, I do indeed have some challenge comments for this one. The big picture goal is to add a password field to user. Now, for the moment, you're just going to store that password in whatever form it comes in. So if someone types out mypass123 as their password, that's what you're going to save to the database. Now, this is known as storing a plain text password, and it's very bad to do in terms of security. We are going to explore how we can correctly store our passwords and hash them later on in the class, but for now, we're not going to worry about that. For now, it's okay to store those plain text passwords in the database. So step number one, we want to set up this new password field as a required string. We also want to ensure that the length is greater than 6, so 7 or more characters. The more characters, the more secure the password. Next up, we're going to trim the password, removing any spaces. And finally, we're going to use a custom validator to ensure that the password doesn't contain the string password. Now, to get this done, you can use the includes method, which is available on all strings in JavaScript. If you haven't used that before, you can Google JavaScript string includes to pull up the documentation and learn how it works. So for step number 4, you want to use a custom validator. Now for step number 2, you could use a custom one. You could also use the built-in one. Either way gets the job done. From there, you want to test your work. Create a user with valid data, create another one with invalid password data, and make sure you're getting the expected results. All right, take some time to knock that one out, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play. How did that go? Let's go ahead and kick things off down below by setting up the password to be a required string. So I'll put that right here after email, though the order isn't particularly important, and I'm going to go ahead and set it up as an object, putting a comma afterwards, so the age property gets set up correctly as well. From here, we'll start off with the type definition. Now, once again, the order we put things even inside of the object in here is not important. I just typically follow a pattern where type comes first. So type is going to be string. And I mentioned that I wanted to make this a required field. So required is going to get set equal to true. Perfect. Now, from there, we can move on to the other steps. I want to make sure the length is greater than 6. And I also want to ensure that I'm trimming that password. Now, for the length, you could have either used a custom validator or you could have used the built-in min length validator, which we explored in the documentation. And I can set this to 7 to ensure that the minimum length acceptable is 7. From there, we'll go ahead and set up trim by setting trim equal to true. Now that brings us to the last change we need to make for password, which is to ensure that the password doesn't contain the string password. We can do that with a custom validator like we did right here for email validation. So I'll set that up by first configuring the function validate, setting it up as a method using that ES6 method definition syntax. We know we get the value right here, and then we can throw an error if something has gone wrong, if the password is not valid. Now, in our case, what we're going to do is once again set up an if statement that triggers when the password is invalid, and we're going to throw a new error with our error message. And we can say something like password cannot contain inside of quotes password. So giving them very clear instructions as to why things have failed. Now, for that if statement, what do we want to put inside of here? I want the code below to run when the value includes, using the includes method, the following, the string password. Now, if you looked at the documentation, you would have found out that includes returns true or false. It returns true if this is included and false otherwise. Now, this is completely acceptable for the purposes of the challenge. One thing you'll note, though, is that this is not going to work if they type in password with a capital P. We can always temporarily convert the value to lowercase to do a case-insensitive comparison. Right here, value dot to lowercase. So we're going to take the lowercase version, we're going to compare that with password, and that's going to allow us to have a more reliable solution. Once again, using this was not part of the challenge. So from here, we're actually all done in terms of configuring the field, and we can go ahead and test things out down below with our user setup. So we're creating the new user and saving them. Let's bring password into the mix. I'm going to get things started by adding that on. Password. And let's go ahead and start with a password that is too short. So right here, what I'm going to do is have a bunch of spaces followed by a couple of letters. Let's use RE32, followed by a bunch more spaces. So after this is getting trimmed, the length is indeed going to be too short. Right now, the length would be fine, but those spaces are going to go away because of that trim setting. From the terminal down below, we can run the file node source db. In there, we have mongoose.js. I'm going to run it, and we're going to get one of those really long error messages. Just up above, we have the actual error message. Now, this is something we'll learn how to customize a bit later. For now, it is path password, and then it shows the value is shorter than the minimum allowed length, which is 7. So everything is working, even though the error message isn't the most useful piece of information. Now that we have this test in place, let's go ahead and test some of the other stuff we set up. So we know trim is working. We know min length is working. Let's go ahead and make sure that our validation is working by using password in the password. Right here, I'm going to use capital P password 123 and make sure that still fails. Down below, I can use Control C to shut things down, up and enter to start them up once again. And what do I get? I get a validation error, which is expected. Scrolling through that error, I'll be brought to the message, password cannot contain password. Perfect. From here, let's go ahead and try something completely valid. I'll use something like phone 098 exclamation mark. That meets all the criteria we've set up. From the terminal down below, I'll shut things down, I'll restart them once again, and this time around I can see that things were indeed saved to the database correctly. Now once again, I am storing the plain text password exactly as the user provided it. That is just temporary. We'll talk about password hashing shortly. Now that we have this in place, the first challenge is all done. From the terminal, I'm going to clear the terminal output, and now we're going to dive into the second challenge for the video. The second challenge is going to require you to customize that task model. Right here, what I'm going to do is comment out the new user as well as the user save call. And down below, we're going to go ahead and uncomment the calls to create the new task and to save it, as we'll use those to test our work for this challenge. Right here, I have some challenge comments outlining what I'd like you to do. Your goal is to add some validation and sanitization to the task. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to trim the description and make it required. So we want to make sure there's not a bunch of spaces inside of there. And we also want to make sure it's always provided. It makes no sense to create a task if there is no description. Next up, what do we want to do? We want to make completed optional. And if it's not provided, we'll set a default value for it to false. So you don't have to tell us the completed value when creating a task. And if you don't, we'll assume it's not done. That's why you're creating it. Next up, you want to test your work and make sure that everything up above is working as expected. So take some time to knock this one out, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd you do? Let's go ahead and kick things off with step number 1. We're going to customize that description. Right here, I'll be setting required equal to true, making sure the description is always provided. And I'm also going to set trim equal to true to make sure we're trimming those leftover spaces. Down below for completed, What we want to do is leave it as optional. You do not need to provide it. But if you don't provide it, we do want to store a Boolean value in the database. Now, out of our options, true and false, I think false makes the most sense. So right here, the default value will indeed be false. Now let's go ahead and make sure all of this is working. What I'm going to do is remove the challenge comments and customize things down below. I forgot if I removed the challenge comments from up above, and I didn't, so I'll take a quick moment to remove those as well. Now let's verify that the changes to task are actually taking effect. To start, what I'm going to do is provide nothing. I'm going to leave off description, and I'm going to leave off completed to see what happens. I'll save the file. I'll run things down below from the terminal by using the up arrow key twice to cycle past clear to our node command, and then I'll hit enter to run the script. And right here, I am indeed seeing that the path description is required, which is good. So let's add it. Right here, description. I'll set it equal to a string. I'll toss some spaces up front, and then I'll have my description be something like eat lunch, which is currently something I'm putting off to finish this video. So right here, this should be valid because we do provide the description and we'll see it get trimmed, and there's no need to provide completed, and we'll see the default value of false, hopefully. Down below, we can shut things down for the final time and start them up once again, and what do I get? I get my task showing up. Trim did work because I'm no longer seeing those extra spaces, and the completed value was automatically set to false. So with Mongoose, we can customize our models to fit our needs, making it really easy to add validation and sanitization into the mix. And those are two essential topics when it comes to accepting input from the user. Now that we have the basics in place, we're going to continue on in the next video, so stay tuned and I'll see you then.